Welcome to VLSI Insiders. This is Dan Hutchison.
This is Andrea Aliati.
Jason Apt.
And this is Risto Puhakka.
So we're closing out the year. I want to wish everybody happy holidays. But last week we were all at Semicon West, and then we've also been just digging into the forecast and finalizing it going into next year. So we'll be talking about that. And then some other exciting things like what's going on in China and some of the process technology. So Risto, why don't we talk about Semicon West, since you and I were both there? What was your impression?
Well, first of all, it was nice to be out there having meetings, even though it was a little bit sparse. But I think the important thing was that actually it was done, and people got out. Some people flew in from especially from Europe, so it was really, really good. A couple tool announcements, good conversation. So I was actually really happy to get kind of good old-fashioned networking going.
Yeah, that was a really nice piece of it. What tools did you see you really liked?
I think it's a little bit niche tool, but Infinitesima has a strong plans of kind of let's call it fully automated inline type of AFM metrology tool, and it was really nice to see them actually really think from basically putting in an online rather than the classic hey, let's do a better lab tool. So right. That was kind of really interesting. Yeah, definitely. Let me put it this way, it's definitely something worth paying attention to over the next couple of years once they unroll it, and because it may have an impact on the metrology space.
Yeah, when I first saw it, when Peter Jenkins went there to run it, they pulled him out of retirement. I said, wow, great technology, but it's not ready for the fab. And it looks like something that's ready for the fab now, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly the thought process there. So, and they have a first tool built up right now, and so they have goods to show very quickly.
Cool. Anything else you saw that you liked?
Well, then really the issue was more of the meetings and getting kind of the overall forecast update, what people view next year, which is really, it's funny, the comments are that everything looks fantastically great. We could ship more. We have a visibility, but then on the other side, everybody's worried. We are in the cyclical industry and say, how long this is going to last?
Yeah, I heard the same thing. I heard 20+%. People were generally more bullish than we were, and then when we, but then they all said it was based on backlog, and they could next year's good just as long as the backlog doesn't get canceled. In fact, some people had some fears that it was like the Semicon at Y2K.
Yeah.
Which, having been at a MoMA event in the podium, I remember that very well, Y2K, where this young investment analyst got up and said, this time it's different. We're not going to have a downturn. Just as it was unfolding. But yeah, the fact that everybody's really cautious is really different from past downturns. So, or when you get to this point where all of a sudden you're on the precipice and nobody sees it, it seems like everybody's worried about it. So that just tells you it's
and if you especially talk to women's supply chain companies, they just pretty much all the major ones invested really heavily. So basically they got their boards approved 100 million year ago. Now it's spent, and now they're going another 100 million. So of course they're getting a lot of questions, how far, how much, and obviously the boards wants to keep the money that they made and do something else with it. So it's a very classic challenge, on management.
And in fact, a lot of the all-stars that made it into this year's Hall of Fame / all-stars that's coming up later this week, early next week, were there because of just really preparing for the upturn and being ready.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's why don't we switch over? You've got the real numbers. You've just finished. You just shipped yesterday. Tell us what next year's how it's going to turn out.
Well, let's start with equipment, actually, since that's always a more difficult one. And For this year, actually, we ended up downgrading the equipment forecast a little bit from 40% to 35%, mainly because companies could not ship in the second half. They just did not have enough parts to finish their systems. So all that is rolling into 2022. And for 2022, we're now expecting equipment to increase about 20%, which again will be a pretty good year. And in terms of the activity, it's as hot as it's ever been. And if you look at it, there are a lot of projects currently ongoing. Intel is building in Arizona. You have TSMC in Arizona. TSMC also is planning to build in Japan. You have Samsung in Texas, Global Foundry in both Singapore and New York, and then you have Texas Instruments, also in Texas. So again, there is a lot happening in the equipment market in terms of activity. So I think the momentum is there. You're right about the backlog, because everybody's hoping that the backlog clears next year. But given the level of activity, I think that 2022 should be another very good year for the equipment suppliers. And switching gears,
60 fab expansions going on right now.
Yes, it's incredible, actually. It's incredible. So definitely there is a lot of momentum out there. So I think that should carry us throughout 2022 without too much of an issue. Then 23 and 24 become a little bit more debatable, but let's get 22 out of the way first. So then in terms of ICs, we didn't really change the forecast very much because most of the numbers came in line with our expectations. We're basically forecasting this year's market to grow about 26% and next year to grow about 11%. With ICs, it's a little bit more tricky because, again, the inventories are becoming a little bit of an issue, especially at the OEM level. They're actually increasing quite a bit. So then it becomes more of a question whether they are going to tolerate higher level of inventory or not. But given what's happening, at the macro level and also with this new variant of COVID-19, my sense is that the inventories will probably stay elevated throughout the year for 2022. So, and if that's the case, then I think that 11% growth is more than doable for semiconductors. But again, inventory is something to watch because, especially at the OEM level, they are increasing.
Yeah, it's interesting because a month ago it didn't look too bad.
Yeah, but when we got, you're right, because but they've been increasing, and especially when we got third quarter data, you could actually tell that, especially in the consumer side and the compute side, especially PCs, they are actually holding a lot more than they have done in quite some time.
Yeah, and a lot of that is that they're holding the inventory they can get, and then they've got all this stuff they can't get, so they can't ship.
Waiting.
And it just shows you how everything is discombobulated.
Correct. And it's across the board. Then it's not just the consumer. We have a similar story in the automotive market. Even there, it's quite a mess actually, because they're only waiting for a few more parts they cannot get, and sometimes it's more of a supply chain issue than a capacity issue. So, and that's what makes the IC forecast a little bit more difficult this year, because again, the pressure points are intensifying a little bit more than what we've seen for quite some time.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about autos is that if you look at it, there's all these chips that are going into the auto industry, but then the shipments of autos continues to be weak.
Yeah.
So anything else of interest with your forecast?
No, and again, this was pretty much in line with our previous update. So it was more, the equipment timing actually that impacted this year's numbers. Right. But as far as the overall demand for equipment, it remains very, very strong. It's just a matter of getting those tools to the customers.
Yeah, and I can see on the semiconductor analytics side that the growth is definitely slowing. And
yes,
it's coming back down again, and it's still way above historic trends, but it's hunting that trend down.
Yeah, and that's to be expected because we cannot grow at 25-30% forever. So it will have to come close to the trend line, and then the question is when and how far do we go below the trend line.
So Jason, what's going on with technology? Where do you see things going next year, and what this year? Like you were telling me about Qualcomm Snapdragon.
Yeah. we made a prediction. This goes back several months now. Qualcomm has a number of different processor flavors, of course, and we tend to, of course, watch the most advanced. I think it's the 888 right now that we're looking at. But take a little bit of a step back. They also have a processor family called 8CX. It's their so-called mobile computing platform processor, and their Gen 3 just kind of came out. We were expecting it to be fabricated with TSMC's N7 for a number of reasons. One is we didn't actually think from a performance standpoint the 5 nanometer was needed, and of course, I mean, just capacity at 5 nanometer is well, it's constrained, only so much that each vendor will get allocated to. But we were wrong. In fact, the Gen 3 of the 8CX is indeed N5. And it's maybe not new news, if you will, but it really strikes me how much capacity some of these big players are trying to capture as much as they can for their processes. Qualcomm, of course, being one of the major consumers for TSMC's leading edge. And of course, it also makes me wonder, how much capacity is available at the leading edge for some of the second tier players. And my guess is not very much.
Yeah, although most of the investment goes into leading edge. So the shortages this year have mainly been in the trailing edge, the more stuff, which last week just finally went to balance in the more foundry space. But to me, it also speaks to the fact that Moore's law is not dead. I wrote about that last week, and you see things like this where they're pushing straight through and skipping, N7 going to N5.
Yeah.
It tells you that there's still a lot of there's value playing the leading edge,
Oh yeah, for sure. On the flip side, though, and this is something that Dr. Cho, who's really a domain expert in the memory side, and Dan, you had a chance to speak with him yesterday.
Yeah, we had a great. There's a video up that you can watch right now.
One of the other things that he's been working on is kind of forecasting where DRAM cell sizes are going over the next probably 10, almost 15 years. So some forecasting there. And what we're seeing, or what it's forecasting, is actually kind of a slowdown in the DRAM cell size shrink. If you go back to 2010, we were on a very steep decline in DRAM cell size. In fact, in the span of about 3 years, DRAM cell size had shrunk about 60 to 70%. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And of course, that speaks to the price per bit, and we're following how expensive it is for DRAM. Now, if you move forward to today and you take a look at where we're forecasting, that rate has slowed down tremendously. So where we are today, to do another 60 to 70% shrink, we're looking at 7 or 8 years out. And a lot of the challenge, of course, is around EUV. So as more and more process steps require EUV, and we can see it's quite limited right now in DRAM, but that's going to continue to grow. There's a constraint there, and we're going to see a slower progression, I think, over the next roughly 10 years.
What about as you know, there's two things that limit scaling. One is can you make it smaller, and then the other one is the physics. Will it work?
Will it work?
And so how much of it's physics? Because I know there was a real slowdown in DRAM because you couldn't store enough electrons in the capacitor.
Yeah, and in fact, if you talk to Dr. Cho, he actually sees a pretty significant change in capacitor materials in the DRAM. I mean, DRAM stores charge through capacitor. Probably towards the end of this decade. So somewhere between 2025 and 2030, there needs to be a fundamental shift of the materials used to create the capacitor. So you can actually not only get the charge, but maintain the charge. And of course, that goes back, there's an access transistor that helps hold that charge in. And we're expecting that to actually switch to a real FinFET design as we go forward in this decade.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that goes back to the real heart of Moore's law is it's just about innovation. And it's cool, we've been doing materials enabled scaling. We really dropped off the lithographic scaling after around 90 nanometers or so. And then since then, there's been a lot of materials enabled scaling, which this is cool, especially for some of our customers who are on the process side that deliver the materials part piece of the scaling. So,
yep.
So anyway, hey, one final note that I forgot to cover was it looks like China's getting hot again. Andrea, you brought it up about SMIC being
yeah, back in the entity list. Yeah, and it feels like they're trying to ban any equipment that is capable of 40 nanometer and below. And of course, that throws another kink in the forecast for next year, because again, China has been a pretty big driver of semiconductor equipment market. And on both sides, on the multinational sides that have fabs there, and also on the local manufacturers there. So, of course, if they cannot get these leading edge tools, that's probably going to, have a negative effect on the semiconductor equipment market for next year.
Yeah. By the way, the interesting thing I notice is the SMIC stock price varies directly with whether it's on the entity list or off the entity list.
Yeah.
For the last week or two, it's been getting beat up pretty badly. So Risto, any comments? I know you.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the issues of export licenses and things like that let's call it re-emerging from the status quo that has been for about 1 year now. So the inquiries are kind of increasing in the challenges around it are increasing it seems to be that it's the US government is getting a harder position on that.
Yeah, okay. Well, Jason, all I can say is you're lucky because the technology really doesn't know national boundaries. An electron is an electron no matter where it is.
There it is.
On that note, I want to wish everybody happy holidays. Thank you guys for being here, and we'll probably come back next year sometime early in the year.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.